This is On Target Institute, building men of character, men who will live a life that demands an explanation. And now, founder and president, Vince Dacchioli.
Hello again, and welcome to On Target Institute Leadership Training Session number 10, dealing with group dynamics. You may recall in our last session we dealt with the one agenda guy. In this session, we're going to be dealing with the teacher theologian. So let's tune in.
This guy, maybe he's been to seminary, or he's been in a church so long that, he's so heavenly minded he's no earthly good. That's another thing I heard somebody say once. The kind of guy's floating 4 feet off the ground. This guy can take a lot of different forms. First, let me deal with a form that probably is not as common, but it does happen. And I haven't asked Gentry to play this role. I'm going to ask him to play the theologian and teacher here in just a moment. But what about the guy who the Lord just spoke to me and told me that this is what we need to do? Hello. Well, there are guys that are going to come at you with what you might think of as being an overly spiritual tone. Now, guys, please hear me. I am not denying for a moment. God does speak to us. I believe God. Is there anybody here that hasn't ever heard God speak to them? I mean, there are people that would say, maybe I've never heard God speak, but most people at some point in their life, if they've had any kind of relationship with God at all, know that there are those moments, and it's not that you've heard an audible voice, but God has given you an impression. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Well, first of all, you need to be very responsible with those moments, because I don't know anybody that with 100% certainty can tell you that was actually God. Was that really God's voice, or did you have some bad pizza somewhere along the line? I mean, I don't know. I mean, there are all sorts of voices that people hear, so you have to be very careful. And again, you have to be very courteous. But if you've got guys in your group that seem to always want to have a word for the group, or always have something to say about what God has spoken to them, or a revelation, or they think they have some gift of discernment, and God's showing me something about you, Craig. There's a certain amount of that probably is okay, but you have to determine when that crosses over and crosses the boundary line. The boundary line is when, first of all, it happens all too often, and you begin to hear some of this stuff, and it just doesn't sound very right to you. You may have to take that guy aside. Let me tell you what I do in meetings. As the facilitator or teacher, oftentimes I'll be in church settings where someone will come up to me, and I believe the Lord really has shared something with me. First of all, I tell them that they're not allowed to say that in the open meeting. Usually I make that very clear, and you can do that in your group. Look, if you think the Lord is sharing something with you, as a leader of our group, I need you, out of courtesy, to please share it with me first. You might have to have that discussion with guys like that at some point along the way. But then when they come up and share the word, you have to sometimes very courteously say, well, you know what, I'm not sure this is the right time for that. And you may have to shut them down. You may have to say this is not the right time. Or you may hear what they have to say and say, man, that is great. I do want you to share that, but I want you to share it like this. You maybe keep them from over-spiritualizing. I mean, you can coach them along the way. But you need to be very sensitive to guys who have that kind of agenda. It's not always an agenda for personal gratification. Sometimes it's genuine, their motives are right, but you've got to manage that and not let it drift off into, a spiritual la-la land. So there's a balance there. But then the other side of that is a guy that may not be hearing from God necessarily in some kind of a spiritual revelation, but he's got the answers theologically, man. I mean, he's not a one agenda guy. He can go anywhere. He's got the whole Bible. He's got it memorized. He knows where to go. So we're talking about, we're dealing with issues from our past, and fear and anger and unforgiveness and guilt. Hey guys, what do you think about this subject? And anybody got some examples of this in your life that you'd like to throw on the table?
Well, brothers, as I've heard you share about the different things that are hindering you from your life, it just reminds me of the Apostle Paul. And you know how the Scripture says about his thorn in the flesh. Well, I have 2 or 3 points I want to make about that, but let me start here in Romans 12.
Stop. What am I getting? As soon as he said that, what's going through my mind?
Bible study.
Wait. No, but not only is a sermon coming, but I've got 2 or 3 points that he's going to eventually get back. What am I hearing in my mind? And what is everybody else hearing at the table? This is going to take some time. We've got a theological concept and 14 subpoints coming. Okay, so go ahead, continue on.
Romans 12 says, I urge you, brothers, in the mercy of God, to present yourselves as living sacrifices, which is pleasing God, and your spiritual act of worship. Now it goes on to talk about renewing your mind, and in the Greek there, that word is the gnosis part of the mind, but it also refers up here to the spiritual act, which is the pneuma part. So when you put the gnosis part of your mind with your pneuma spirit, that becomes the way that we have our spiritual worship.
What do you say?
Now when we relate this back
Gentry,
to Deuteronomy.
Let me stop you just for a second. No, stop just for one more second. You said something that you read a verse that is very interesting to me, and I've read that verse over and over again, and I don't know that I completely capture the essence or the meaning of it. The verse had to do, we go back and read that part where it says we need to offer our bodies a living sacrifice. Take that verse for just a moment and let's relate that to what we're talking about here. First of all, what does it mean to offer our body a living sacrifice? And how does that connect to letting go of our past? Because I think there's a connection there. Talk about that just for a minute, if you could.
Yeah, I believe that making ourselves in the spiritual sense of being sacrificed, laying our lives before God, is really what allows us to come over these barriers and hindrances that you're talking about.
That is excellent. So in a practical sense, how do you do that, though? You know, when somebody says you need to offer your body, what does that mean? How do I offer my body? Is it my physical body? Is it my whole being? How do I offer that as a living sacrifice? Now let me pause there. What have I just done? First of all, he seems interested, doesn't he, in what I'm saying. I've narrowed his focus to a particular issue, and what's the other thing I've done?
Application.
I've guided him toward applying that particular verse to what it is we're talking about here. Now, we could continue this conversation, and I would for a while, until I felt comfortable enough that I wouldn't be really harming him by moving it on. I want to give him a little bit more satisfaction, so I'm focusing him on that particular verse. And by the way, that was a good verse to focus in on. I don't know about you guys, but I have read that verse a lot, and it is, kind of a cumbersome concept to get a hold of. So you look for those points along the way to stop him. And you saw how awkward it was to stop him. A teacher theologian is not easy to stop. In some ways, they're more difficult than this guy, because this guy is going to ramble, and he's making stuff up as he goes. And it can be good stuff. I'm not saying it's bad, but this guy already has the point and 14 subpoints all outlined in his mind. He knows exactly where he's going, and if he doesn't finish it in his mind, he's a failure. So when you interrupt a guy like that, you have to interrupt him in a way that forces him to develop something further than he already has, so he thinks what he's just shared is valuable. Wow, that's a verse that really helped me out with that. So you're appealing to his theological expertise, or whatever. And now, what if we do this, and then at some point Gentry says, okay, this is what in my life, because I'm going to direct him to his life here pretty soon. Give me an example in your life of how that worked. So now he shares with me, and then at some point he might even do this. He might even, what would you do? When I get you to talk about your own life, what are you going to do?
Oh, yeah. Well, let me share you my life verse here, which is over in Ezekiel.
Yeah, he's doing this great. Okay. No, Gentry, hang on just 1 second. I want you to put that down just for a second, okay? Now, what I want you to do is share from your own personal experience, some experience you had. It may not have a Bible verse related to it, where you were able to offer your body as a living sacrifice, and you were able to really overcome something from your past. And what I'm trying to do now is engage him on a more personal level, get into his heart a little bit, and try to move him that way. Because the only way you'll take some guy off of the agenda, is to get at his heart. And at some point, you got to try to do that. Now, Gentry is very good, by the way. He could go either way here. He could, no matter what I said, he could go back to this, and he can never get to his heart level. So what do I do with him if that happens? Well, first of all, I would try to probably eventually move him and get him to be quiet and move it around a little bit. But then after the meeting, what might I do? I'd pull him aside and I'd want to talk to him. And first, what would I say to a guy who sees himself as a theologian and an expert?
I really appreciate what you bring to the group, but this setting is maybe not.
But the first part is, I'll tell you what, that was some great stuff. I've heard, and you got to look for the stuff, and there's always going to be little jewels in there you can pick out. Find something to compliment him on. So that was some great stuff. But you know what? I really, your being part of this group adds a dynamic and a flavor that is really refreshing, because we need this. Isn't it great how we can all work together and we all bring different gifts? And you know what? I need your help in this area. And from time to time, I may be asking you to either read a scripture verse because you now know he knows how to read the scripture verses, or to look something up. You know, he may be the guy that looks it up, and you can appeal to his desire to have to speak and to have to teach. But you can also ask him to help you in terms of time management, how we manage the time in our group. And I don't want to take too much time on one issue. Keep in mind, keep focused on the discussion question. We want to engage other guys. I need your help with that. You engaging him to help. Okay? Any other thoughts about this kind of a guy?
Yeah, I have a question. What about the person who oversimplifies a matter by saying, like Romans 8:28, all things work together for the good as the answer? Now, is that the same thing as the one agenda, or is that a different?
It could be a one agenda guy that always goes to the same thing, but a guy that might use a Romans 8:28 kind of answer, all things work together for good, in a very loving way. Sometimes it's not bad to really probe that person a little bit and ask them if they've ever had, what is the most traumatic thing that has ever happened to you in your life? And usually they'll come up with something that's been very traumatic, and you can be frank but yet very soft with them and say, now be honest with us. I mean, when that happened to you, were you able to think about Romans 8:28 at that time? Did you actually think about Romans 8:28 and feel like a butterfly and everything's okay and it's cool? Now, one of two answers. If they say yes, then you say, man, help us understand how you're able to do that. And does that have to do with your relationship with God or whatever? Or if they say no, then you're beginning to get the message across that, well, it's not always that easy. I mean, how many of you guys have had trial? I mean, James says, consider it pure joy. Yeah, right. I mean, but how many of you guys can now look back at the trials in your life, and you honestly can consider it pure joy because you saw what God did with it. So you can use it as an opportunity to kind of have a broader conversation about those kind of trials and tribulations in your life.
Okay, the teacher theologian. Again, a lot of great information. You may be viewing this right now with some other brothers. I would encourage you maybe to take some time and go back through the 4 different counterproductive roles that we've been talking about. But I'm looking forward to our wrap-up session coming next with dealing with the emailer and the hypocrite. So stay tuned for that one.